Why is it so important to detect cancer early? Speak to that.
It's gone from the big C cancer to a smaller C cancer. Real talk. If we can find it early, almost every cancer we can treat.
Cancer is a disease that can affect anyone, but it does not affect everyone equally. That's why Amgen Oncology and the American Cancer Society have teamed up to raise awareness and support for health equity in the fight against cancer. And with that, I bring in Dr. Robert Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen, how are you, my friend?
Man, I'm good. And now that you're here shining a light on the issue around cancer, I'm even better.
My brother, it's good to hear it. I hope to have an incredibly enlightening conversation. So let's start with the bird's eye view. We're talking about inequities as it pertains to health in cancer. Tell me, what is the thing that no one knows or that we don't know enough about inequities as it pertains to cancer? Let's just start macro for a second.
I'm gonna hit you like this. I think when it comes to inequities in cancer, I would say that we've known this for a long time. There's no surprise. So disparities and inequities ain't new, but for many of us who've been in the trenches or grew up in the neighborhoods and all the rest of that, disparities have always been there.
Personalize it for a second. How do you feel as far as your own representation, and what role do you specifically play as a Black man knowing there are inequities?
For me, the success is how A, am I going to bring science closer to the community? And B, how do I make sure that on my watch, we are diversifying not only the young people coming up, but we're diversifying the leaders in the field, and in fact will help enhance our fight against cancer.
Well, speaking of enhancing the fight against cancer, don't they say some of the most preventative measures are all about screening? It's all about early detection, finding out early. Why is it so important to detect cancer early? Speak to that.
If we can find it early, almost every cancer we can treat.
Now, wait a second, Doc. Wait a second. Because you make it sound so simple, but cancer, I feel like, is synonymous in this day and age with fear, with mortality, with the end. Do you feel as though we've made such significant strides against cancer that stigma of fear should no longer be associated with it?
It's gone from the big C cancer to a smaller C cancer. Real talk. We have lung cancer patients now that we would have literally given up for dead back in the day. We have made such amazing progress in such a short time. But the issue is that most of the people in the communities, most of the people in my neighborhoods, most of the people in rural areas, they don't even have an idea. They're still working off the 1980, 1990 playbook when we've already eclipsed that like more than 15 years ago.
The Black population is 13% in our country. However, only 5% are these clinical trial participants, which leads me to believe that there's still to some degree a lack of awareness or a fear with the African American community and either clinical trials, early screenings, etc. Why does that exist?
You know, again, man, this is where one of you have the echoes from the past that still are impacting, the activities of the day. I'm gonna be straight up. I mean, most of our kids don't know nothing about Tuskegee, but they know one thing: mistrust and distrust, right? The medical profession. I gotta be honest with you that I think that over time, since Tuskegee and all these other things have happened, the medical profession and science have cleaned up their act. Things that used to happen to folks, they don't happen anymore because we have institutional review boards and things that are put in place. You just can't come up with some crazy study these days and, quote, test people as guinea pigs.
Okay, let's speak real. A lot of the inequity in our healthcare system, it comes from both a lack of education, a lack of exposure, but a lack of trust, which you're now speaking to. How can you mend the rift that was created in the 1930s because of so many experiments in some of our Black communities? How can you now mend the fracture in trust between our medical health providers and some people in lower socioeconomic status communities, particularly the Black community?
First, the institutions coming into these communities need to be there more than the length of a grant. The reality is, if we're going to be committed to this, we need to be committed to communities. And my commitment is a 15 to 20-year commitment. Number two, we have to be much more humble. I think sometimes we go in places and actually act as if people don't themselves have knowledge that we can actually benefit to help out, understanding that the community is there to benefit us. And third is just working with partners like you and other people who can actually help us get the message out.
Okay, then let's talk about some of these communities you referenced, some of these underserved communities. What types of resources would you recommend for these underserved communities to learn more about cancer treatments?
So my old school answer would be just, again, making sure we set up more clinics and all the rest of that stuff. But I'm going to extend that old school answer to having programs that you're putting on. People watch that TikTok. I mean, for real, YouTube? Come on, y'all. So the reality is we need to get, as a profession, much more sophisticated about getting with partners who can carry the message.
I love that. So you don't personally view social media as the enemy. You're kind of on the side of, well, if you can't beat them, join them, but more importantly, join them and take over for good and with positive information.
That is absolutely where I am. Think like the wisest of men or women, but speak in the language of the people. And what we haven't done, and why we have this buildup of mistrust and distrust and other things within the medical profession and its communities, is because we frequently were speaking at folk. Talk to people in a way that they understand, because talking at them is not doing any good.
Okay, well then let's speak something that everyone can understand. This was a very jaw-dropping statistic for me. How do you feel when I tell you that Black women have almost a 40% lesser survival rate than white women as it pertains to breast cancer?
Oh man, this is one of these things where I wish I was the new kid on the block, and that surprised me. We knew that when Black and white women, if you go back to the 1930s and 40s, similar rate to death, what allowed that to start separating was the intervention of the mammography, which some had access to the screening and others did not. Every scientific new finding we put in inadvertently and artificially creates disparities. Now, why? The question becomes why. And I want to get to part of this is that we typically have blamed the folks from the neighborhood. Now, the crazy part is we say, well, if only they got screened. But I'm like, that's some crazy talk if you ain't really been in the hood, right? The issue isn't that the folks in the neighborhood are contributing that. It's what are the structures that are contributing, or I like to call, what's the ZNA impacting the DNA? And that is, what's the zip code neighborhood of association that's impacting that DNA in their biology? In fact, the funny part about people from these same neighborhoods is this myth that, color folk, they say Black folks don't want to be on trial. That's bunk. That's just like going to a high school dance and somebody is sitting there and they're like, well, why doesn't the person dance? Nobody asked. Because you can't get people to take care of their own health if they don't trust you.
You talked a little bit about these clinical trials. Why is it important to have diversity in clinical trials?
Having people all involved from different places and spaces actually can only help make the drugs more personalized for you and more safer. It's a continuum of care.
But what you're telling me is that we need to potentially treat, based on different biomarkers, based on different genetic makeups, white Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, Latino, we need to treat people differently, and we can't just all try to umbrella under this, well, we're all just the human race.
So the truth of the matter is, yeah, we all are coming back to the human race. But the wonderful part about evolution and all these other things is it allows us to actually have a much more mature thing that it's beyond just black, white. It's where is your ancestry? Because whatever happened there, we could potentially create therapies and drugs that would benefit you more than someone else. This is why it's a wonderful time of science, man. I mean, we are literally only scratching the surface about what we're going to be able to do for people. So we can actually move towards now by looking at biomarkers and moving towards the research of going that when I see a person in front of me, I'm treating the person in front of me.
What action can we take to reduce the inequity in healthcare as it pertains to cancer?
When it comes to disparities, it's not that we don't know what to do. It's not that we don't know how to do it. It's we haven't always been committed and stuck to a plan. health disparities research has been around for 30, 40 years. We have now literature and tools that we know how to address this. The biggest issue is, and I hate to say it, it's the will. We have to uppercase want this. And once we do that, we'll figure out a way how to actually reduce cancer disparities.
Well, again, I want to thank Dr. Nguyen for joining me today to talk about this important issue. Health equity is a social justice issue because everyone deserves to have a fair and just opportunity to prevent, find, treat, and ultimately survive cancer. Go to cancer.org/fightthefight to learn more about the right to survive. Doc, while you're still listening, man, that was phenomenal. This is one of those where I want to go watch it back just to listen to some of the W.E.B. Du Bois quotes, some of the stats. And in all honesty, you genuinely had me like, oh, okay, cancer, you a punk. You know, I used to, boy, cancer make you shake now. You really have me thinking like, wait a second, it's not a death sentence. So thank you, brother.